So we are going to be talking salary negotiation stuff today. I do want to kick us off with a tip on something that really addresses kind of rule number one and rule number two when it comes to salary negotiation. And this is something that I started using about, I guess it's 18 years ago. And I've never really shared it because, well, you know what? Honestly, it's a little petty and it's a little cutthroat. It's a little cold-blooded. But, let's all try to be nice when we use it. You can figure out how you want to use it. I got some ideas. But let's get into this. And, if you follow my salary negotiation techniques, there are two things that I always tell you I want to make sure that you do when it comes to maximizing your compensation. Really anything. The first rule is you negotiate when your stock is the highest. And so what do I mean by that? Well, when somebody really wants you, when an employer wants you, and you've proven to them how valuable you are and what you can do, and they're, squealing with glee and falling all over themselves to try to hire you, your stock is a lot higher at that point than when you jump into a recruitment process or you have an interview screen with a recruiter or an HR person to kind of kick off the process, and they start asking you about salary expectations or what's it going to take for you to leave or what are you expecting in the way of salary or anything of that nature. You're an unknown, and so your stock isn't really high. And what a lot of you do is you think that based on what an employer has budgeted or what an employer is budgeted for the role or pressing you to share with them, that this is something that's going to make or break you, and your stock is at that point should be at its all-time low, because if your stock is here and it goes down, well, that's not good, and you're likely not going to get a job offer, and it's a moot point anyway. But the second rule is I never want you to negotiate with someone who can say no but cannot say yes. Right? There's a lot of people that serve as gatekeepers that can say no, but they can't necessarily approve a higher salary. Who understands what I mean by that, right? So when you get into recruitment processes, recruiters or HR personnel who are initially screening you, and I mean excluding the fact that if you are interviewing for a spot on their respective teams, though the recruiter in those situations can only say no. No, I don't want to proceed with you. No, I think your expectations are too high or anything of that nature. But they're not the ones who are ultimately going to be able to improve what you ultimately earn, regardless of how high or low that is. They're not going to be the ones with the final say, not usually, virtually not ever. And so a lot of you break these two rules right in the first interaction with a potential employer. And I want to talk about how to get over the latter issue in something that I, as an executive recruiter, when I founded Mile Walk in 2004, I needed to learn recruitment, and I also needed to sell my services. I was a solo practitioner at that time, and I would farm out my executive recruitment search services to companies, mostly technology organizations or people who had a heavy IT requirement for success, whether that was a consultancy, a software company, or even an organization who just required a lot of IT resources. And initially, when I was getting my business off the ground, I would negotiate contracts with them for what they were going to pay me if they ultimately hired somebody through my recruitment firm, Mile Walk. And when I initially started in 2004, I was far less concerned with what I was getting paid and much more concerned with getting a successful placement, an actual service to the client and the candidate, but making the match, because I knew at that point in my business's evolution, it was much more important to have great working relationships and success stories and individuals who I could use as testimonials, references, and other people who could speak on behalf of how nice it was to work with me, speak on my behalf. So what I did initially in 2004 and early in 2005, probably through midway into the year, I was negotiating the contracts, and I would say, look, I'm pretty open to, whatever your standard rate is. And a lot of times it would maybe be something like 20% of the individual's first year base salary. So if they would hire somebody for $100,000 in base salary, they'd pay me 20, or some companies were even lower, 15%. I wasn't too concerned. And I would say to them, if all goes well after we're working together for a year, I'm likely going to raise my rates up to 25% or higher. And I just want you to set that expectation now. So I wasn't too concerned. And I started to get into business and I started to make placements because I knew in a very short period of time, I was going to change that rate and I was not going to take anything less than what I felt it was worth in terms of value that I was providing and all that other good stuff. And what would happen is about midway through 2005, most of the time I was interacting with someone who was in the recruitment department. It might be the head recruiter, head of talent acquisition, might have been head of HR, could have been the chief people person, somebody like that. Sometimes I was interacting with the CEO or other C-levels. It depended on the size of the organization, or maybe it was a line vice president or an EVP or something like that. But as I started to approach mid-2005, I would notice that the recruiters initially, when I would talk to them as I was reaching out, or maybe they got a referral to me or I got a referral to them, or I cold called them, and they would want to know immediately, Andy, what's your rate? Right? They were all about what's the rate. And does this sound at all familiar to you when you get into a recruitment process and somebody says, what are you expecting in the way of salary? How much do you cost? And then what I would do is analogously as I always share with you, what is it that I want you to do? I want you to defer that discussion. So I would say to the recruiters, I'm sure we'll be able to come to the right kind of terms. I can't really tell you what I cost because it's going to be dependent on what you want me to do. Right? Doesn't that sound familiar? Right? I don't know how much I cost you. I don't know what you want me to do. That's what I want you to share with them. Right? The more value you provide, the more they're willing to pay. The employer is willing to pay. So I would say to the recruiter, let me come on down and spend 90 minutes with me. Let me walk you through my approach, my methodology. Let me introduce me and my company to you. Let me talk to you about why I'm unique and all that other good stuff. And I would engage in these discussions, not much unlike an interviewing process for you, right? I want to dazzle them. I want to show them why I'm the right person to help them recruit individuals. I was a practitioner. I had held a lot of these positions. I knew what it would take. I'd worked for companies and grown companies like yours. I can understand. I relate to the culture. I relate to the job descriptions. I understand. I can screen them technically. I mean, there was a whole host of things, not to mention the methodology that I built was pretty great. So I would get into these discussions and they would say, hey, this is wonderful. And I'd ask to meet either the executives in the company or maybe the hiring officials or whoever it was, because I wanted to make sure that I could hear it from them, what they were looking for. So I would build these relationships. And then what would happen is I would get into a situation where the people would say to me, hey, Andy, this is great. We love you. We want to work with you. Hash it out with so-and-so, the recruiter, or so-and-so, the HR person. Get the contracts in order and let's get rolling. And then what would happen is I would get in a situation where, and I know you find yourself in this position where you're talking with the recruiter or the HR person about your job offer. I'd be talking to the recruiter or the HR person about the executive recruitment contract. And I had a standard contract. They had a standard contract. We would use one of the two, and then the other party would amend whatever we needed to amend, or we would have a discussion about what was changeable or what was negotiable, those kind of things. But inevitably, it would always come down to, okay, Andy, this is great. We love you. Here's our rate. This is what we're willing to pay. And the tip I want to share with you is when you run into these situations, right? Doesn't this sound like, hey, here's what the job pays? And I want to pay you 15%, or I want to pay you 20%, or I want to pay you whatever. And I would say, right, based on the value, based on the speed, based on the level of complexity, this, that, and the other thing, right? How much time I'm going to save you, so on and so forth. And I would go into my value pitch and I would explain and reiterate to the recruiter, echoing things I had said in previous discussions with him or her and the management team. And then I would get into situations where the recruiter would say, Andy, I can't go any higher, right? It would sound something like that, right? Who's tracking? Who understands this concept as a job seeker? And one of the things that you need to know about when you're negotiating and how the other person is feeling about their leverage in the negotiation process. And you might have heard me say this a time or two, or maybe you just understand this from a human behavior standpoint, or maybe you can think back into the archives of your life where you might have encountered this. But when you're speaking with somebody, the word yes doesn't sound as powerful as the word no, right? No, we're not doing that, right? Hammer down, right? You get that, right? That feeling of control comes with no. It's more forceful. Yes is like I'm giving in. Okay, just the connotation and the feeling, generally speaking. Not always, but generally. So knowing this, I would try to get the recruiter, as even I would try to get my clients in positions like this, right? Instead of saying, hey, can we hurry up and schedule the candidate because they're interviewing with somebody else? Can we all meet on Tuesday so we can accelerate this process? I would never frame it that way, because then they might say yes, but that sounds like they're giving in. I would rather say something like, or ask them something like, you don't want to lose the candidate, do you? Right? No, I don't. Right? That sounds like I'm more in control. So when I would get with the recruiters in these situations where I was negotiating a contract, I would say to them, it sounds like, okay, I know we got this great thing going here and I've really enjoyed meeting everybody and I really want to work with you, but it sounds like you have the authority just to say no, and that's as high as you go. Is that correct? High as you can go. Is that correct? And they would say yes, because they're really saying no, right? And that sounds pretty good, but that's just a setup question, because the question that I really want to ask them is, well, it sounds like you have the authority to say no, but it also sounds like you're powerless to say yes or to go any higher. Is that true? And I cannot tell you how uncomfortable it is for somebody to admit they're powerless, right? It's not a very good feeling. And so at that moment, I personally am willing to walk away from the deal if they're not going to meet my rate at this point, right? My days of working for lower wages was over. Okay. But going forward, there was no way. I was willing to walk away, knowing that, and knowing I was talking to an individual who had the power to say no, but didn't have the power to say yes. I was okay with giving it one last jab to see if I could actually get to somebody who could say yes, or get this person to admit that they needed to go higher up the ranks. Okay, who's tracking with me so far? You see where I'm going with this, right? I'm speaking with somebody who has the power to say no, but does not have the power to say yes. And so inevitably, one of a couple things would happen. I know some of you are out there right now going, oh my God, Andy, I could never say that to somebody. And that's okay, and you don't have to, okay, if you don't want to. But there may be times where you want to pull out something like this. And so what would happen is one of a couple things. So the first option that could happen is the person could be just pissed off and say, geez, Andy, you make me feel like, I'm meek and I'm weak and I'm whatever, and I don't like you and I don't want to work with you. So no, they might say that. And I'm okay with that, right? Because if you're not going to pay my rate and you don't understand or appreciate my value, and maybe I didn't do a good enough job selling me, either way, I'm not going to work with you. And so and I'll tell you what I would do in that scenario when they would come down with a hard no. But most of the time, especially if I took the time to meet with other people in the company, executives or hiring officials, just like a lot of you do in the recruitment process, where you interview with other people who would be very sore if they lost you, I would say to that individual, sometimes they would say, all right, you know what? I don't have the power to say yes, so let's go and get so-and-so, and maybe she can review this, or he could review this, or they could review this, or whatever. Now, that would happen most of the time, and much of the time, I would end up working with them for the rate that I wanted to. My rate, my minimum rate. And otherwise, I walked away because I was willing to walk away. But now what also happens is you need to recognize people's motivations in negotiation. Now, in my particular case, which may not apply to you, one of the things that I know about about the recruiters is many recruiters that are corporate recruiters are incented, bonused, or compensated on different metrics related to their recruitment engine. And one of those metrics is CPH, it's cost per hire. So how much does it cost on average for us to hire a person? That cost doesn't include their time necessarily, the corporate recruiter's salary, but executive search firm fees that they've paid, subscriptions that they might pay to software products or LinkedIn or whatever it might be. And the recruiter knows that if they're going to pay 25% instead of 20%, the cost per hire is going to go up and it's going to make them look bad. Now, to me, it's a silly metric for those of you that are in the recruitment space, because the metric itself isn't silly. It's nice to monitor that you're not frivolously spending money on recruitment. But what most companies don't do is they don't tie the cost per hire back to the quality of hire. You know, a low cost per hire doesn't do you any good if you're hiring ineffective people, or they're not lasting very long, or they're not very good, right, at their job. So most organizations aren't savvy enough to connect these metrics together with the speed and the effectiveness of the individual and how long that hire stayed and all that other good stuff. That's an aside other than recognizing the motivation of the recruiter. But I'm working with somebody who can only say no and can't say yes. So I want to get out of that. And so I think that that's just something that you should keep in mind as you're negotiating your own contracts, or as you're negotiating your own employment agreements or offers. If you're running into a roadblock with a recruiter, now how might you want to use this? Well, number one, I want to remind you, don't be negotiating expected salaries and stuff in the beginning of the process. Your stock isn't high enough. Number two, you're also talking to somebody who can do what? Bounce you from the process, but can't raise their targeted range or whatever. They're not going to do that. Number one, they don't even know you, and likely they're not willing to do that, or they don't have the power to do that. So I want you to recognize that. And then when you get all the way down to the end, if you're dealing with somebody who can say no, who can't say yes, I want to encourage you to, in some way, shape, or form, in whatever form you want to ask it, see if you can get to somebody who can actually say yes. And by the way, this doesn't just necessarily mean that it's only the recruiter or only the HR person who might be presenting you with an offer. It could also be what? It could be a hiring official, midline manager, who's extending an offer to you, who might not be able to go any higher than a hard band that the company has set forth for that manager. But you can still ask the question, right? Or you can still ask them if they're powerless. Now, keep in mind, I look at it this way. I'm only using that if I'm in a situation where I want to walk away from the deal. So that condition needs to be present, and I need to be willing to do that. And one of a couple things is going to happen. They're going to say, no, I'm still not moving you forward, or I'm not going to go get somebody else to help me and approve this. But if they do, and they do approve your number or your higher wage, it's not likely that you're going to be working with that person anyway. I wouldn't be so concerned. Yes, it's better to have everybody love you, but at the end of the day, is it better to have everybody love you, or for you to get paid what you deserve? So that's a little tip I wanted to share with you. It may be applicable in some of your situations. I don't think I've shared that tip before, but if you enjoyed that tip, make sure you click the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the station. And if you're watching this little package on a recording, I'll see you next week. If you're here with me live, we're gonna go to the chat, and I'm gonna answer some more salary negotiation questions, which I am looking forward to doing.